Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name's Claire, and I work at Vermont Family Network, and I'm really excited to be chatting today with Adam Wechsler, who is a young man who has worked with Vermont Family Network. His mother has been there for, I think, 16 or 17 years since you were a little guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just really excited to chat with Adam today about his transition into adulthood. We're laughing about what does that really mean, but and especially during this time of COVID, what that looks like for him. So Adam, if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself, starting as a little guy at 3 up until what you've been doing most recently.
Sure. So I was diagnosed with a neuromuscular disorder when I was 3 years old, called Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and it's one of the forms of muscular dystrophy, and is progressive over time. And so I've been fortunate enough to be able to graduate from college. I went to the University of Vermont, and I got a degree in environmental studies, and I've worked after graduation as a research assistant with the professor at UVM, and I've also worked a little bit with what's known as a passive house consultant in my town. So that's a green building standard. And then currently I'm serving as a full-time AmeriCorps member with Resource in Williston, and basically working with students with disabilities to help prepare them for the workforce.
Resource does a lot of really cool stuff. That must be a really cool place. I would be remiss if I did not point out that you are only 2 days into being 24.
Yes, that's true.
So you're about as fresh a 24-year-old as you could be. And what is it like being a 24-year-old, even beside the COVID stuff at this point, but being a 24-year-old with a disability? And what are some of the things that you see as being tricky or being barriers for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think as a young person with a disability, there's a lot of things that we have to consider, perhaps more than a normal 24-year-old. Basically just because I can't just decide to leave my house where I'm living with my parents and like move somewhere like across the country. So I'm kind of limited in sort of my living situations, and other things as well. Like I have to be concerned about like if I'm interested in going to a restaurant, if like they're if the restaurant's accessible, because still there's often many places that have physical barriers for people who use wheelchairs, and it's like that's going into barriers a little bit. So I think one of the things I've noticed especially are like physical barriers, as I talked about, and then so physical barriers, so that also kind of determines where I live, because I can't live somewhere that has stairs, determines where I can go, based on like restaurants or other places having stairs, and just like general accessibility issues in the built environment.
Well, we were chatting earlier about the fact that your degree is in engineering.
It's environmental studies.
Environmental studies.
Yeah.
I know you've tried to explain this to me many times. but the fact is you're, I think, 2 years out of college because you didn't graduate in 2018.
Yes.
And in theory, a lot of young men at 24 are working full-time jobs, making a pretty decent living, hopefully.
Hmm.
And that has to be different for you as far as your insurance and your medical coverage, correct?
Hmm. Yeah. So that's definitely a concern as well, um, because I currently receive benefits from Social Security. So I get a SSI every month, and then I also have Medicaid. Um, so with those two programs, I have to keep my basically bank account below $2,000 at any given time. Um, so obviously that makes working a little trickier because I can't just leave any money I make in my account for a long time. Um, but fortunately, I have what's called an ABLE account, which is basically an investment savings account. So I'm able to save money that way that won't impact my SSI or Medicaid. Um, but I still have to be conscious of like um, jobs I'm looking into and like how much money um, those jobs would pay, and making sure that I'm able to stay below the income limits to maintain my benefits.
Which is probably like the opposite of what the average 24-year-old is wondering when they're looking at a job. They're
Yeah,
not worried about it paying too much money.
right. Yeah,
And
that's
for
it's
you,
definitely.
that could be a huge, huge barrier
Hmm.
because your medical expenses are very, very large.
Yes, that's true. Um, so that's definitely another barrier I have to contend with.
Mhm. Now, I mentioned that your mom has been at VFN, and she is an amazing advocate, and zero doubt that some of what you've learned about advocacy, you have learned from her.
Hmm.
Um, you don't have to tell her that if you don't want to. But I know that she has done many things like trips to Washington and many conferences all over the country and does a lot. But you have just started to get into this as well as an adult, correct? Can you
Yes,
tell us a little bit about that?
sure. So at the beginning of, well, I'll back up for a second. My mom has been trying to get me involved in more advocacy for a while now, but I finally had the opportunity to join this adult advisory committee with Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, which is an organization um, that basically is an advocacy organization for people with muscular dystrophy. And one of the big things is lobbying our legislators about increasing funding for research. So in March this year, I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Washington, D.C., and on behalf of Parent Project, um, talk to staffers for my senators um, and congressmen. Um, so that was a really great opportunity, and something I hope will have an impact.
So two things. When you were there, what was it you're trying to get across to them? What is it you're hoping will happen as a result of your visits there?
Well,
Some of the
so
things, there's probably many.
yeah. So each year, PPMD usually um, has some like goals, and and those goals usually involve like either advocating for level funding for different research initiatives, like at the National Institutes of Health, and also uh, the Army of all places, because they have a medical research division.
Yeah.
Um, and so, like this year, we're asking for more funding for certain programs, and um, hoping that in like appropriations bills, we're able to increase the levels of funding for different research programs.
Yeah. Well, and you're a young man that uses a power chair.
Mhm.
And we were talking about how I was like, did y'all drive to DC? And you said you flew, and how that is not quite as simple a process for you as it is for someone else. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Yeah, flying is definitely not the easiest with a 400-pound electric
Is it
wheelchair.
400 pounds, Adam?
It's about 400 pounds.
And very, very expensive.
Yes, it's basically the cost of a new car. Um, but anyway, so with flying, there's always a concern um, because there's no easy way to really get uh, a heavy wheelchair onto an airplane. Um, so we have to worry about sometimes the making sure the chair doesn't get damaged. Um, and so we just have to plan a lot more in advance. Um, and then the other challenging part is that I have to transfer from my wheelchair to an aisle chair. So then I can get on the plane and then get transferred to seat. So then coming off, it's pretty much the same way. Um, and so the airline industry is definitely not very accessible. Um,
Yeah. Well, because those chairs that they provide don't have well, the equipment or the attachments that your body needs.
mhm. Yeah, they don't have all of the components and stability that my chair normally has.
Yeah.
Um,
So it's
but
quite an undertaking to consider getting on a plane to go somewhere.
yeah, uh, but there's actually, fortunately, there's some groups out there trying to um, basically lobby the Federal Aviation Agency or administration to basically make wheelchair accessible planes. Um,
Where
so
you could just
plane,
maybe lock in or something into with your own chair.
yeah, where I could just drive onto the plane and um, maybe like a seat in the front folds down and
Right.
then have tie downs. So one of those organizations is called All Wheels Up.
Cool.
Mhm.
Cool. Now, again, I talked about your mother and your parents, and they really they've done a lot to empower you. And just the fact that you
Mhm.
lived on campus by yourself through college, I think, is evidence of that. But because VFN works with families so much, I'm curious of how um, the influence of your family, and have they always encouraged you to follow your dreams? Have they ever have you ever felt like they worried about you getting out there in the world around some of your medical fragility? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I feel like my parents have always encouraged me um, throughout life for whatever I've wanted to do. Um, and like especially like uh academically, like they've supported me um to basically pursue a college degree and also supported like some of my other interests. And yeah, so obviously my parents were worried like when I was looking for colleges um and then eventually settled on university on UVM. Um and so fortunately is university was close to where we live. Uh but I think it was definitely challenging for us to navigate
Mhm.
um me living on campus because we had to hire uh, a number of personal care assistants who would help me in the morning and at night.
Mhm.
Um, so that was definitely challenging to figure out. Um, but fortunately, my mom has a lot of experience in this area, and she knows how to access a lot of resources.
I tell everyone, if you need something, talk to Joey.
Yeah.
So going back to visiting DC, I don't know if we mentioned this, but you went just in March of
hmm
2020, got back, and within days, everything starts shutting down around us,
hmm
right? And what has and so everything's changed and it has remained that way for 2 months. What has that been like for you? Being medically fragile, but also just having your world completely change.
Hmm. Well, so the transition itself to working, fortunately, I've been able to continue working from home. Um, and well, technically in the AmeriCorps program, we call it service. So I've been serving from home. Um, so I've been fortunate in that respect. And I guess the transition hasn't been too much of a shock to me, just because I had worked from home the previous year or two after I graduated. Um, so I've had experience working from home before,
Mhm.
and but the other component was the AmeriCorps position I have was my first full-time position. Um, so I was just starting to get used to like working full-time in an office setting uh, and learning basically just what it's like to serve with other people. Um,
Yeah.
and
And that
so,
just changed overnight.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah, it did change overnight. So um, that piece was abrupt. Um, but I hope I might be able to return to service this year at our site in Williston. Um, but that's still up in the air at this point, and not really sure what that's going to look like going forward, um, or how I'm going to meet my hours basically. Um,
Well, and that's because a lot of this will look this transition back into, I don't know, previous life as much as it's going to will have to look different for you because you have considerations other people don't have, correct?
yeah. Um, so I'm considered someone who would likely be vulnerable to complications with the virus, um, because I do have a compromised immune system from uh, being a steroid user for many years now. Um, and just because of the nature of my disorder, I basically lose muscle strength over time, and so that includes like my heart and lungs. Um, so something we want me to stay away from as
Yeah,
much as
definitely.
possible.
And you mentioned earlier when we were chatting earlier that you have some great friends who really stuck through with you from your when you were a little guy, and still your friends, but you're not able to interact with them in real life at this point, right?
Yeah, right now, yeah, I think that's also true for a number of other people. But yeah, we're definitely very limited right now and haven't been able to uh, see friends. But with kind of what's changed, um, I've been able to keep in touch more with uh, people I don't see very often, um, which I guess has been one of the positive effects of this, um, is being able to connect more with people and then also like use different technologies like we're using right now, like Zoom,
Mhm.
to be able to communicate face to face.
It's true. I mean, there's always some silver linings. Um, so I'm curious. I believe we are all going to get through this COVID stuff, and there is another side. And I'm just curious, what is it? What's your vision for your future? What is it you want ultimately?
Hmm. Well, I think that's something I think often about what I want to do with the rest of my life. Um, and I definitely am interested in um, getting getting more jobs in uh, the area of interest I want to go into, um, which particularly is like green design and universal design. Um, and so like before the pandemic, I was kind of really moving in that trajectory. I felt like because I started working with a career coach at Resource, who offered to work with us AmeriCorps members. So like we had been developing a plan for how to position myself to go into that industry more. But since the lockdown, haven't really been meeting with him. So that kind of plan that we've been working on has kind of been on hold. But I'm considering working on like learning different design software while I'm still home, and still seeing what I can do to transition towards that goal. So I don't know. My hope is that I'll be able to move in that direction sometime in the near future. But I may be limited until we're able to find an effective treatment or vaccine against this virus. So,
Because you really can't take chances.
no, unfortunately not. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, again, knowing your mom and some of how she speaks about you, you have really been defying odds for a lot of years now, and said you're in your 24th year, and that's something that the doctors didn't originally say would probably happen, correct?
Yeah. When I was first diagnosed, the life expectancy for people with Duchenne was quite limited. Like, they didn't like when they first told my parents, but back in almost 2000 or so, basically they said, don't expect to see your son graduate high school, which I think was really hard at the time for my parents to hear.
Of course.
And that's what really drove my mom, especially, towards being more of an advocate, because that wasn't something she was just going to accept. And back then, we didn't really have the standard of care we have now for people with Duchenne. And it's really quite remarkable how far a lot of the research has come, just within the past 2 decades. And I think the future is going to be really promising, because there's always new discoveries being
And a
made
lot of
every year
your advocacy is around that research and making sure
and
that
accelerating it.
you've even taken part in some trials, correct?
Yeah,
Clinical trials.
yeah, I've been in a clinical drug trial since I was probably about 10 years old. So I've been taking an experimental medication for more than half my life at this point.
It's
Um,
experimental for 14 years. It's like, how
yes,
long do things take? It takes a really long time, right?
right.
These are long-term goals.
hmm And like the medication that I've been taking, it's been approved in Europe, um, for my condition, um, but the FDA over here in the United States has kind of been lagging behind.
Tell you, Adam, you're a cool young man, and I'm really grateful for you taking the time to chat with me today, and for
Absolutely.
letting us highlight you and as just a cool guy who's making it happen, but also seeing the barriers, and during this time experiencing further barriers.
hmm Yeah.
So I'm going to say goodbye to you and end the recording.
All right.
And thank you all for listening. And yeah, it's been such a pleasure, Adam.
Yeah. Thank you.